Welcome to the next video about the editors. In this time around I'm going to show the rig editor. In general you can export rigs already with the export scripts from Blender, but you can only export certain collision shapes and only a limited amount of information, so the rig editor comes into play to fix all this. So let's take an example and show a little bit how this all works. So in general we can work with a preview which gives you editing possibilities for various situations, so you don't have to edit it in the rest pose if you want to. You can also edit it straight in certain situations to check if, for example, something works out. So you're quite versatile in this one here. Come on. So, and that's, for example, how it would look like with all shapes shown of all bones. And this you can also show this way if you want to keep an overview of how your shapes work. And you can also do this with and without X-ray support. So here can you check how much it overlaps or stands out. Most of the time though you want to use X-ray. The same you can also do with constraints. It's gonna show you all the constraints. These are the magenta arrows in this case. I come to this in a moment. And in general you always see the active shapes and constraints of the selected objects. For every bone you can work with spheres, boxes, cylinders and capsules, whereas both cylinders and capsules can be tapered if you want. So this means if you take for the head, the radius of the start and the end can be different. So you can make shapes, analytic shapes, which enclose quite well the model you are working with. Currently not supported is triangle meshes. I call it point hulls. That's simply the rig editor doesn't support it yet, but theoretically Bullet would support it, but that's work in progress. So for the shapes, you can either edit them straight in the editor with a typical move and rotation, or you can directly edit the parameters in there, so you can work precisely. You've got also a little mirroring support. So for example, if I delete this one, I can go and say okay, mirror this over to the opposite. I have to select it this way, so I can say mirror it over, and then I get a copy from the other side mirrored to the left side. So you can theoretically work only on one side and mirror it over to the other side to speed up editing a little bit. You can also import, so you can select a certain number of bones and say I import from a different file. Can say import, and then, sorry, I'm in the wrong mode, import only works here. I could say I take another rig and it would only import the selected bones, so you can easily copy your work to other rig files, continue working. And while you import it you can also scale it directly, so you could for example make a half-size model, import all the bones, shapes and constraints and say scale it to 50% if your model is 50%, and it just works. I don't have it in the smaller version, but I used it for example for the dragon model where I have a large and a smaller. I could just import and scale it directly to, for example, 50%. Also here, next one is the constraints. They are shown like you might expect it with ranges, so you directly get an idea how it works. This also would apply, for example, if we would use geometry difference. So in general, all constraints are 6 degrees of freedom constraints. So I don't work with hinge constraint or ballpoint constraints. You have just a 6th generic constraint, and the physics module determines if it could use a hinge, for example, or a ballpoint to improve, to optimize. So just keep it generic, enter lower and upper bounds for angular and linear, and you are just set. And if, for example, I here make, let's say, something like this, I could go and say, yes, it's like that, sorry, like that, and like that. So you see already the displacement is shown with this box shape. So linear and all the possibilities are like this. Let's go back. So then you have under the bones, what is particular, you can have dynamic and non-dynamic bones. This is a little bit special. What simply means that you can make rigs which work as either physics simulations or as kinematic simulations, and you can also mix them to a certain amount. You always have to watch what's working, since it depends on the physics module the user has installed. You have here also the weight, and a good problem is always how to make a model with certain how shall I say it, certain number of weight, and it is distributed overall. So I can say, okay, I select all, and if I use this command scale mass, I get the sum of all weight, and I can say, okay, I make it now only half as weight. So all weights will be rescaled, keeping their proportions towards each other to match the final rate. So you can easily create a model, say which bone has which amount of mass relative to another, select all and say scale the mass, and you can say what's your final math, and it just works out. A little help to make it fast. Last but not least, you have simulation mode, so you can simulate the model directly in here and check out how the constraints and the weight stuff works. Nothing particular here too. And you can also directly preview a certain bone, for example. If you want to see how this one acts, we can keep it selected and check out how it works in its limits. So made for working quickly, but without too much bloat in it. So it's just to the basics. Okay, in general, rigs can have any kind of root bone as long as the root bone is not yet parented to another bone. So only these, for example, are really useful as root bones. And in general, yes, you have the typical preview modes. You can also alter under what situation it works, like gravity, changing this, or changing what objects you want to use to tumble it across. The typical work you can do. So that's more or less about this rig editor. As you see, it's rather simple, as it has quite a specific task. Okay, so the next time I will show you the animator editor. So have a nice time.